The third global system are the global upper air currents, which you probably know as the jet stream. These are high velocity, like sometimes 180 miles an hour, upper air currents. That means upper air winds. Upper air meaning 25 to 35,000 feet up. High velocity upper air currents that occupy the contact zone between warm tropical air and cold polar air in the mid-latitudes. I live in the mid-latitudes. You probably live in the mid-latitudes. In the mid-latitudes, the jet stream is a westerly wind, which means it blows out of the west. The jet stream plays a large role in the weather of the United States, especially during the winter. And in California, it's critical for the weather patterns in the winter. In the West Coast in general, I think, but in California in particular, and especially Southern California, the jet stream really is the game changer on whether in California we're going to get that storm or we're not going to get that storm. Take a look at this sort of bisection of the atmosphere of the troposphere. You can see at the top it's stratosphere, so we're in the troposphere. If you look along the bottom, you can see the equator, 30 degrees north, 60 degrees north, and then the North Pole. Of course, at the equator, the air is rising. It's a thermal pressure belt, hot air rising. You can see the clouds forming. Then the air comes up, it cools off, it begins to descend. It descends at about 30 degrees north where the subtropical high is at. So we have the equatorial low, then we have the subtropical high, the equatorial low thermally induced, subtropical high dynamically induced. Then you can see that away from the subtropical high, you have warm air headed north. And then you can see away from the polar high, you can see that there's cold air headed south. Those two air masses meet at about 60 degrees north, which creates the subpolar lows as air rises. And then, of course, that's a dynamically induced pressure belt. The polar highs are found at 90 degrees north, and that's a thermally induced pressure belt. This is cold air subsiding. But then look that you can see also on here, these two jet streams, the polar jet and the subtropical jet flowing along. All right, now, there's a lot of terminology here. I'm going to give you the terminology I want you to know. It says Arctic oscillation, positive phase, negative phase. I don't want you to worry about any of that terminology. What I want you to see first is look at what they're calling the positive phase and notice this. That kind of white squiggly line going across is the jet stream with the black arrows in it, and I've got a yellow arrow pointing at it. This is normal conditions. Normally what's going to happen is that the jet stream is a westerly wind with a little bit of squiggle to it. Then notice that north of the jet stream, you have cold air. South of the jet stream, you have warm air because the jet stream occupies the contact zone between warm and cold air in the mid-latitudes. Then notice also that it's going over the top of Central California. So we sit at a very interesting place in Southern California because we're not far enough south to be tropical. We're not far enough north to be able to get lots and lots of precipitation. So it swings back and forth with our climate. Then notice over here in what they're calling the negative phase, that the jet stream begins to undulate. Undulate means it moves snake-like. And notice it is indeed kind of snaky going across there. But also notice this, that when it dips south, like you can see, it's dipping south over the top of the Great Lakes and all the way down to the southern tier of the United States, almost to Florida. When it does, it allows cold air to head south. But then notice over there on the west coast that the jet stream has moved north. That allows warm air to move north. I'm going to tell you a very quick story. When I lived in godforsaken Illinois, sorry Illinois, but I had a bad year there. When I lived in Illinois for the 1 year that I taught there back in the early 90s, we had 1 week where the temperature did not go above zero. That means the high temperature was not above zero. One night it was minus 40. And what had happened was during that week, it was in January, I believe, the jet stream had dipped really far south, and where you see high pressure on that negative phase, air had come from the Arctic down over the top of the center part of the United States. I was working with a guy from Kentucky who had also taken a job there. And at that college, we had our own weather station, and we had live weather from our college constantly being fed to this readout that was in the hallway. So it gave us air temperature, it gave us relative humidity, it gave us air pressure, it gave us wind direction, it gave us wind speed, all of that. And him and I were having a conversation on the coldest day that year. and we were standing next to the machine, and the temperature was minus 23. And we were talking, and then it went to minus 22. And we kept talking, and then it went to minus 23 again. And he looked at me and he said with his Kentucky accent, the hot temperature today was minus 22. And I was like, oh man, I know I'm not in SoCal. So this is because of the jet stream. When the jet stream moves around, it allows the air to move around also. Now, a couple of years ago in January, I took a screenshot of this particular pattern of the jet stream when I was teaching in California. And what happened was this. If you follow the jet stream from the left-hand side and you take your finger and you follow the screen and you just follow the arrows around, it makes these huge loops. But now I want you to notice that over the top of California, you can see there's a low pressure system circulating counterclockwise. Notice the jet stream is doing the same thing. Its movement is also counterclockwise. So if you took your hands, like take your left hand right now, do it. Excellent. Take your left hand and then have your palm pointed up towards the ceiling. Set a pencil in your hand. Go ahead and do that, or a pen. And then take your right hand and put your right hand on top of your left hand so the palms are touching each other. So the left hand palm is pointed up, the right hand palm is pointed down. Now take your right hand and push your fingers and your palm and your hand towards the tips of your left hand. What begins to happen to the pencil? It begins to roll. And a very similar thing starts to happen in the atmosphere where you can get a rotation happening as a result of all of this circulation. And you can see the same thing happening on the East Coast, where as the jet stream swirls around, it's swirling in the same direction that the low pressure system is moving. So as long as those pressure systems are wrapped up in the jet stream, they are kind of the subject of the jet stream. See that circulation there? However, the minute they break with the jet stream, or the jet stream breaks its pattern, as happened with this, where that northern part of the jet stream broke off and it began to go back to its normal westerly pattern, and then that southern dip was no longer in contact and it broke down. Nevertheless, the low pressure system remained intact. And whenever a low pressure system or high pressure system gets broken away from the jet stream and is no longer in contact with the jet stream, we call this a cutoff pressure system, which is a pressure system that's no longer in contact with the jet stream. The result of that is that that pressure system and its weather will remain over the top of that area until something comes along to move it out of the way, whether that's a wind system or whether it's a storm or the jet stream. In the case of California, what happened that January was we got stuck under a series of cutoff low pressure systems, and it brought us rain almost every day during that January, which, you know, for Southern California was highly unusual. It was the wettest January of my life. The problem for California is that we got stuck sometimes during the winter under cutoff high pressure systems. Because in California, what happens is the door opens about November 1st for us to be able to get precipitation, and then it closes again on about April 1st. That's our precipitation time. You know that we don't get precipitation really during the summer months. We have that one moment that we can get it. And California is the biggest state in the country in population with 40 million people. It's the most important agricultural country in terms of money. You know, we grow top-end crops like grapes that we make wine out of. You know, our Pinot Noir, our Cabernet Sauvignon, our Chardonnays are world-renowned. And of course, we grow citrus products, olives for olive oil, and just olives for eating. Lots and lots of tree nuts. All of these things need a lot of water. And we can't just draw it out of the ground or we'll run out because that's ancient water, so we rely on precipitation. Well, if we sit under high pressure for long periods of time from November through April, we're not going to get much precipitation because high pressure is not associated with it. Now, if you look at this, you can see the globe that's to the left-hand side, the upper left-hand side. You can see the jet stream is doing this normal westerly pattern, and you can see there's a low and a high that's cut off from it. And then you can see on the bottom right-hand side, you can see that it begins to make this undulating pattern. And when it does, notice, warm air moves north for the high pressure, cold air moves south for the low pressure. When this happens during the winter and cold air comes from the Arctic, this is what is commonly referred to, at least over the last 10 years or so, as a polar vortex, which means very cold air coming in, especially to the center part of the United States.